Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our preview of the Sedgwick Brand Protection Product Safety and Recall Index for the second quarter of 2025. We hope you're ready for a busy session today. Joining me are my colleagues, Matt Walker and Joe Rizzo. So, Joe, are you ready to dive into the data and insights?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, we have a lot to talk about. Matt, how are you feeling about the presentation today?
Yeah, I feel great. So I think our listeners, though, they're also going to be very glad here that we've done a lot of the hard work for them. Hopefully, we'll help them to better understand a very dynamic regulatory landscape. And I'm sure everyone will appreciate the insights that come from our partners who will share the predictions later in the session.
Thanks, Matt. So the second edition of the 2025 Sedgwick Brand Protection Product Safety and Recall Index will be released tomorrow. As you know, the full report always has more details than we can fit into 1 hour. Today, we'll share highlights from Q2, as well as where each sector stands halfway through the year. Be sure to download the full report for even more information, as well as an early look at the July 2025 recall numbers. So, Matt, can you walk us through the industries that we'll be covering today?
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. So the index looks at 5 industries in the U.S. It looks at automotive, consumer products, food and drink, pharmaceutical, and then medical device. We review data that's been collected from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, and then finally the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. Just a reminder, Sedgwick also publishes a European edition of our recall index. So our EU and UK colleagues, they'll be hosting a webinar next week, August 28th. The European index will be released the following day. We encourage you to next week's session just to get an overview of regulatory changes and recall data from across the UK and EU. Since we're also at the half-year mark, we have our Australian mid-year webinar scheduled for September 18th. So even more to look forward to, a lot more that we're going to be publishing. But for now, we're going to focus on the U.S., and I'll turn things over here to Chris.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joe. So let's look at the U.S. recall numbers from Q2. So overall, the number of recalls increased to 861 events, and that's compared to 775 recall events in Q1 of this year. And this marks the third highest quarterly figure in 6 years. Every single sector had more recalls this quarter than last. FDA food recalls reached their second highest quarterly total since Q4 of 2019. So take note if you're in the food and beverage industry. Consumer products had its third highest quarter in over 20 years. So if you're in the consumer product industry, take note of that as well. Very active right now. Even with these gains, the half year or H1 totals were slightly lower year over year. So the first half of 2024 had a handful shy of 1,700 recalls compared to 1,636 events for the first half of this year. Now, quarter over quarter, the number of units recalled across all 5 of the industries covered decreased by 31.5%, so a pretty good amount. It fell from 125.3 million units in Q1 to 85.8 million in Q2. And this is the lowest quarterly total since Q2 of 2022. And that's despite only FDA food and the pharmaceutical industries having fewer units recalled this quarter compared to last. The first half figures for total units recalled in 2025 are also lower. There were 211.2 million units recalled in the first half of this year, and that's compared to 384.1 million units recalled in the first half of 2024. So, all right, Joe, what else is going on across the market sectors in the second quarter?
Thanks, Chris. That's great information. So in Q2, NHTSA, CPSC, and the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the FDA and the USDA, all moved quickly to reimagine a new era for government operations. The Trump administration aimed to streamline regulations and accelerate processes through the introduction of pilot programs and the adoption of AI tools. Matt, what have you observed in your recent discoveries?
Yeah, so trade issues, they continue to dominate headlines as investigations and national security risk for several industries were launched, as well as tariff negotiations continuing. There was an emphasis on boosting U.S. manufacturing, especially within the automotive, consumer goods, and pharmaceutical sectors. Now, Chris, should we take a closer look at each industry?
Yeah, Matt. So as far as the agenda today, we're going to start with the automotive industry. That'll be followed by consumer products. After that, we're going to highlight some data and trends in the food and drink industry, then medical devices, and finally, we'll round out with the pharmaceutical industry. We will pause at the end of each industry section to take your questions and share insights from some of our partners. If there's time, we'll also try and take some questions at the very end. Similar to other index webinars, the audience's microphones are muted, so you'll have to enter questions into the chat or the Q&A module, which we'll be monitoring throughout this program. Similar to other programs too, we will start each section with a question to test your knowledge. So you'll see a pop-up on the right-hand side of your screen where you can record your answer. Don't forget to hit submit. All right, Joe, what is our first question in the automotive sector?
All right, thanks, Chris. So here we go, guys. So anyone who has joined us on a previous webinar knows all the questions are multiple choice and everyone's answers are anonymous. Okay, so here is our first question. On May 29th, U.S. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy announced a number of deregulatory actions across NHTSA, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to simplify the burden for U.S. automakers and get rid of outdated rules. Among the changes were several regulatory updates to the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards and Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. So here's the question. How many rules were included in the Secretary's announcement? A, 52, B, 27, or C, 85? So please make your selection. And guys, while we're waiting for the audience to make their selection, I wanted to get your opinion, Matt and Chris, on this new emerging technology of driverless vehicles. What are your thoughts on that technology, and have you experienced that before? Have you been in a Wago or a, automated car?
I have not. I have gotten an Uber before that it did have a driver, but they did turn on the self-driving mode and then just turned to me and started to have a conversation, which really didn't make me feel too comfortable. So I'm not sure I'm at that point where I'm really comfortable getting into a car that doesn't have a driver at all. But we'll see what the future looks like. Matt?
I'm definitely not ready for it. I've seen it. It was a little concerning when you're pulling up next to a car and there's no driver actually in the car next to you. It kind of freaked me out. Wasn't expecting that. I'm not in a spot yet where I'm ready for that. I like to be in control, steering my own car and everything.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you guys. Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready for it yet. Looking over to the side and seeing nobody driving a car, I'm not sure, but I think the technology is coming here, guys, and it's coming fast. So, guys, we'll share the answer to our question here a little bit later in the presentation. So now let me turn things over to Matt to talk about regulatory trends. Matt, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. So uncertainty around U.S. tariffs on imported automobiles, automotive parts, steel, and aluminum continue to impact U.S. automakers, distributors, and suppliers. The UK and US reached a deal in June that provides more favorable terms for UK exports to the US, while the EU and other countries, they were still negotiating at the end of the second quarter. NHTSA announced its new automated vehicle, or AV, framework in April. The strategy will streamline reporting requirements for AVs, ease some of the regulatory burdens, and support the commercial deployment of AVs in the US. In another effort to simplify regulations for automotive companies, President Trump revoked California's waiver under the Clean Air Act and nullified 3 regulations implemented by the California Air Resources Board. The rules included targets for new passenger vehicles to be electric or fuel cell powered by 2035, which was a mandate to increase the percentage of zero emission medium and heavy duty trucks sold, and stricter nitrogen oxide standards for new heavy duty diesel engines. California and several other states which had adopted the stricter measures have sued to have them reinstated, but there have also been lawsuits against the regulations from the fuel sector. So Chris, do you want to take a closer look here at the data and the answer to a poll question?
Sure thing, Matt. But first, the answer to the poll question. Yep. And so the question: how many regulation rules were rescinded by Secretary Duffy in May? So it looks like The majority of the audience did get this one correct. The answer is A, 52, though it is likely that more changes are on the way. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the detailed data here. So in Q2 2025, NHTSA issued 246 automotive recalls, and this is slightly above 14% more than what we saw in Q1 of this year. The number of units affected also increased. It rose by 97+%, so quite a bit, from 3.7 million last quarter to 7.3 million in Q2. There was only one recall that involved more than 1 million units. Recall figures in 2025 trailed the 2024 totals at the halfway point this year. At the first half of 24, there were 505 automotive recalls, which impacted 17.4 million vehicles. But the first half of this year, there have been 461 recalls, so a little lighter, with just over 11 million vehicles affected. And then electrical systems were the leading cause of U.S. auto recalls in Q2. They were linked to 49 events, and that was up from 44 from the last quarter. Equipment-related issues were the second most cited cause, and they were involved in 29 recalls, and then structure concerns was third, with 26 events being reported. Somewhat interesting now to see a change from mechanical issues leading to recalls to more and more electrical systems. And then by volume, backover prevention systems were the leading recall category with 2.59 million units affected. And this included one recall involving 1 million plus units. Structure concerns ranked second with 744,000 units being impacted. And then hydraulic service brakes were the third highest category by volume. There were 741,000 units affecting over 12 recalls for that one.
Yeah, so good information there. Joe, we talked a little bit about NHTSA loosening safety rules for autonomous vehicles. What are your thoughts there on what you're seeing?
Yeah, guys. So I think, some of us are not ready for that technology. But yeah, as you mentioned, Matt, NHTSA did loosen some of the safety rules for autonomous vehicles. So they unveiled a new framework, easing regulations to accelerate the deployment of self-driving vehicles. So some of the changes included things like allowing vehicles without traditional features like a rear view mirror. Yeah, who needs a rear view mirror, right? If you have no driver anyway, right? So that's one of the changes. Expanding some of the exceptions for non-compliant U.S. built vehicles. So I'm not sure how that one is going to play out here in the end. But they're definitely moving forward, and I think there's some companies that are going to benefit greatly from it, such as Waymo, Tesla. They're definitely going to see the benefits of these, expedited, loosening, I should say, of the safety rules for autonomous vehicles. So definitely the technology is coming, guys.
Yep.
So guys, before we take questions, we want to share insights from our partner, Jared Nelson with DGA Group. So I'm going to read this excerpt here. Taking a conservative, reactive approach to communicating about safety issues no longer works in our current environment, where the media landscape is deeply fragmented and moves at hyperspeed. When a company is first made aware of a potentially systemic safety issue, the communications team should be engaged as a strategic partner. The team should begin scenario planning and determine thresholds at which to activate those plans. As new developments arise and the situation escalates or de-escalates, updated plans and messaging should be developed and disseminated. So now we'll take some questions for the automotive industry. And Chris, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, sure. So just a reminder to the audience, they can enter questions directly into the chat module. I do see one question here related to more FDA early communication. So we'll touch on that when we get to the pharma med device sectors, but great question. A comment here about using Waymo routinely. Love it. So that's good to hear. Makes me feel more comfortable. Let's see. What should automakers and driving system providers be thinking about in light of the recent amendment to the Standing General Order on crash reporting for vehicles equipped with certain advanced driver assistance systems and automated driving systems? Matt or Joe, when you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So the amended order, I think it simplifies the reporting process for crash incident data, as well as narrowing down some of the reporting criteria, among some other changes that are also in there. Companies do need to review, I think, that order, though, against their compliance process. And just keep in mind that it's going to be important to coordinate with other parties just to ensure that that incidences are reported. With the amendments, not every party is going to be required to file a separate submission. So it just needs to be clear who will complete that task with each of those events that do occur.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. All right, I don't see any more questions for auto, so we'll keep rolling. Matt, ready to get to consumer products?
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So we'll, of course, start with our question. So in May, a major dry shampoo company agreed to pay a settlement against claims that its products were contaminated with benzene, which is a known carcinogen. How much were the plaintiffs awarded? The answer: A, $13.2 million, B, $63.7 million, or C, $3.6 million. Please make your selection. While the audience is working through that one, Chris, I know that ICPHSO, there's an upcoming international event, and I know we're roughly 6 months away from the annual symposium in February. You want to talk a little bit about what's taking place there?
Yeah, sure. So if you're in the consumer product industry, definitely check out ICPHSO, icphso.org if you're not familiar. Great organization. London is upcoming for the International Symposium in the middle of October, and they've tied that with Electrical Safety First, which is at the same venue, but the day after the ICPHSO event ends. So definitely check that out for London. And then, as you mentioned, Matt, the annual symposium, planning for that is up and running quite a bit, and call for proposals out. So a lot of good things, I think, are being lined up for that one. So if you're not familiar with it, definitely check out ICPHSO.
Yeah, absolutely. Great event. Well done, always. Now I'll turn things over to Joe here to talk about consumer products.
All right, thanks, Matt. So the second quarter of 2025 saw significant legal penalties for consumer product manufacturers. In June, a U.S. District Court sentenced 2 dehumidifier manufacturer executives to more than 3 years in prison, plus 3 years of supervised release and thousands of dollars in fines. This marks the first time that there has been a criminal prosecution for failing to report product defects under the Consumer Product Safety Act. It's not entirely clear where jurisdiction for consumer product safety enforcement will fall moving forward. The latest budget request from the CPSC proposed eliminating the agency and having its functions integrated into the Department of Health and Human Services, or better known as HHS. This comes after 3 of the 5 CPSC commissioners were fired. The courts will determine the ultimate fate of those 3 commissioners. Congress has taken steps to enact mandatory standards for lithium-ion batteries used in a range of micromobility devices, including e-bikes and e-scooters. The CPSC halted its own efforts to advance mandatory regulations for micromobility devices over procedural concerns, though it has acknowledged this is an important issue. While manufacturers and distributors of smartphones and other types of electronics were exempt from the initial round of tariff discussions in April, the Department of Commerce launched a Section 232 investigation into whether semiconductors, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and their derivative products pose a national security threat. In July, President Trump said that he would impose tariffs on these types of products. The details of when and how much were not shared at that time. So, Chris, do you want to help us take a closer look at the data?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. But let's see the answer to our question. So the question posed, how much was the settlement in the contaminated dry shampoo case? It looks like the majority chose B, 63.7 million, but the answer is actually C, 3.6 million. The company had issued a voluntary recall back in 2022 for several of its brands of dry shampoo aerosol products due to these elevated benzenes. All right, so now we're going to dive into the data for consumer products. So in Q2 of this year, there were 109 CPSC recalls, and this is a 7.9% increase from 101 events back in Q1. And this is the highest quarterly total since Q2 of 2008, and only one of 2 quarters in the past decade to record more than 100 recalls. So very active agency. The number of units recalled was also higher. It rose 163+% compared to last quarter and reached 12.2 million units. So big jump. There were 4 recalls that each impacted more than 1 million units each. So that drove a lot of the higher numbers as well. Comparing the half year, there were 210 recalls in the first half of 2025 compared to 178 in the first half of 2024. Now, in contrast, the number of units recalled is considerably lower. There were 62.4 million units recalled in the first half of 24 and only 16.8 million in the first half of 2025. Electronics accounted for the most recalls by product category in Q2, and those were linked to 20 events. Sports and recreation was second with 19 events, and that was followed by children's products with 17 recalls. Now, in terms of recalled units, sports and rec was the top category with 4.5 million units impacted in the quarter. This was predominantly driven by a recall of 3.8 million dumbbells that posed a risk of injury. Kitchen products had 2.5 million units recalled. It was the second highest category by volume. Then home appliances was the third highest product category in Q2. It had 1.8 million units that were recalled. Falls and the combination of burns and fire were the top consumer product hazard by event in Q2 with 14 recalls each. Entrapment was second with 10 events. Fire, crash, and injury was third with 6 recalls each. Injury was the leading risk by volume. It impacted 4 million units. The combination of burns and fire was second by volume. It was connected to the recall of 2 million plus units. Burns as a standalone risk was third with slightly less units.
Information, Chris. So Joe talked about CPSC. I think everyone who's listening, and within the consumer industry probably has some understanding of some of the changes that have taken place in the CPSC. But with everything that's going on that we're seeing from the commissioners, who were relieved of duty and whatnot, Chris, what can manufacturers do in this, kind of turmoil that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, good question, man. It actually plays into a question that came in with the current state of the CPSC. Will recalls continue to be a focus of the agency? Recalls have been increasing, but will there be potential? With potential changes to the CPSC, what will that look like? So, there is that rumor mentioned about dissolving the CPSC and moving it under HHS, and I think right now my advice is companies need to be more diligent than ever. Even if some of the rulemaking is down, the enforcement is incredibly high. So the recalls, as we saw, were high. The use of unilateral press releases and other tools at the disposal of the agency. But then in general, the liability with recalls is increasingly higher and higher. So companies need to be diligent with protecting their brands, but also protecting and reducing risks as well. So I don't see recalls going down at all. I think recalls are going to continue to go up. I think the landscape is ripe with supply chain challenges, labor shortages, and I think the agency is going to continue to be laser focused. So I don't see, even with these changes in speculation, recalls going down.
Yeah, I think important note that you said there is protecting your brand, protecting your consumers. The way the U.S. is here from a litigious standpoint, there's always the possibility of some sort of suit from consumers, so definitely important. Now, before we move on to questions, we want to share some insights here from our partners, Sarah Carlson and Judith Sitkoff, who are with Sidley Austin, and they said, despite recent political upheaval within the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Commission's commitment to consumer safety remains steadfast. While proposed changes to the very foundation of the CPSC may leave manufacturers, importers, distributors, and retailers of consumer products grappling with implications for their businesses, companies must refrain from easing off the gas pedal when it comes to compliance. Protecting consumers against unreasonable product risks should and does transcend both party affiliation and organizational structure. Partisan or not, the Commission still knows how to get companies to comply. So important information there. You can read more in the published recall index. Now we can move on to any questions for the consumer product industry. Chris?
Thank you, Matt. It does look like there was a question just related to the ICFSO symposium. So it looks like a link was put in there for the international one. We can put a link in for the annual symposium, which is in February in Orlando as well. Let's see. Do you expect to see mandatory lithium-ion battery standards put in place for micromobility products?
Kurtz, I can jump in on that one. I think yes, while the timing and the process is still a bit unclear, there is support within the CPSC and Congress to act. Uh, Device companies and battery manufacturers should be taking a close look at their current compliance plans. Hopefully, they are already following the voluntary safety standards, so the transition might be relatively simple. So I don't think it's going to be that much of a challenge for most companies.
Got it. Okay. All right. I don't see additional consumer product questions yet, so we'll keep. Here's one that just, should mandatory safety certification be done beyond micromobility and their batteries? Well, my only comment with that, lithium-ion batteries are a dangerous good, and if they're deemed damaged, defective, and recalled, it can be a big problem as well. So I think companies have learned that the hard way. So companies can protect themselves by making sure that they do have safe batteries, safe cells, certified as well. So good question, because these type of recalls can be incredibly complicated and expensive as well. Difficult, especially from a global standpoint, when you're dealing with a lithium battery that's damaged or defective internationally. So making sure companies are protected and using safe batteries, I think, is definitely important.
One
Right.
thing that I will add on there, sorry, Chris, one thing that I will add on there is it's important for manufacturers also to think about when you get complaints of batteries and you need to go through any sort of testing, safe handling of those batteries through transportation from a consumer back to a testing facility. While the batteries may have expended all the energy, if there were a thermal event, if there's anything left within those battery cells, just safely and compliantly shipping those in case there's an issue. We see a lot of times about thermal events happening with batteries on logistic trucks, UPS, FedEx, whatnot. So being cognizant of that and thinking through that.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Looks like the link for the ICFSO annual is on there now, so appreciate that. With that, let's keep moving, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So now on to the food and drink sector, but first, of course, our question. So in May, the FDA said it would implement a post-market chemical review program to ensure the safety of chemicals used in U.S. food supply, which is not one of the three main components included in the draft proposal for the program's post-market assessment prioritization tool. Is it A, a modernized evidence-based prioritization scheme to review existing chemicals by risk and priority? Is it B, consideration of the cost and availability of an ingredient? Or C, a final systemic post-market review process shaped by stakeholder input? Please make your choice.
All right, I'm just curious, Matt, while people are submitting their answers, I know you have a newborn. It's probably almost 3 months now. What's that process? Infant formula has been a hot topic in food, but has that been a process trying to narrow that down?
Yeah, he will be 3 months old next week. So these last 3 months have flown by. My sleep has definitely been impacted a great deal, although I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for, though, is all of the different options when it comes to formula and different infant meals. Didn't know that there were options for with rice flour, for sensitive stomachs, regular formula, I'll call it, and then all of the different brands. So it's definitely been a learning curve to figure out which formula works best for him. I think my wife and I have tried like 4 different ones. We finally, though, have gotten the one that seems to work the best for him, his stomach and his needs and everything. So everything's going great now. Just was a little bit of a process, kind of guess and check for a few weeks until we found that right one.
Got it. Well, trial and error. Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, and Matt, the good news is, and just think of this, Matt. Now, Chris and I have, older kids, and when you're in a supermarket, eventually you get to go right past that aisle eventually and say, you know what? I don't have to turn down that aisle anymore. So that day will come now.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait. So, Chris, now I'll turn things over to you here to jump into the food and drink sector.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So The Trump administration continued to establish its priorities in the second quarter. Part of that included significant staffing and budget cuts throughout the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, and the FDA. The FDA may look to state authorities to carry out more inspections and enforcement activities moving forward, which that would definitely be interesting. The agency will also rely on generative AI technology to help the agency do more with less. FDA Commissioner Marty McCarty has instructed FDA centers to begin using AI to make the pre-market review process more efficient by quickly assessing documentation submitted with the product application. The commissioner instructed all FDA centers to scale their use of AI by June 30th of this year. AI may also be used by the agency as it rolls out new post-market review of chemicals in food. The FDA said that the initiative will increase transparency and ensure safety of chemicals in the U.S. food supply. Several steps are already underway, including a review of the post-market assessment prioritization tool that we mentioned earlier. The MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again Commission, named cumulative chemical exposure and ultra-processed foods as two of the primary factors contributing to the rise in chronic health conditions in U.S. children. Food manufacturers can expect an increased scrutiny of their ingredients based on the Commission's findings and the new post-market chemical reviews. Ingredients and chemicals are also being examined in infant formula. Take note, Matt. In March, the HHS and FDA announced Project Stork Speed, with the goal of ensuring the safety of infant formula and strengthening the supply chain. Matt?
I will definitely be paying attention to that. So now the answer to our question, and then, of course, the latest on the food industry data. So again, the question was, which is not one of the three main components proposed as part of the post-market assessment prioritization tool for reviewing chemicals? Looks like our audience did select the correct choice overwhelmingly. So the answer was B, consideration of the cost and availability of a specific ingredient. The third element of the tool is an updated list of chemicals under review. Those include BHT, phthalates, ADA, propylparaben, and then titanium dioxide. So Joe, do you want to go into the FDA food recall data?
Thanks, Matt. Will do. So the number of FDA recalls rose 12.6% in Q2 2025 compared to Q1. They increased to 143 events. In contrast, the number of units impacted dropped by 79.6%. They decreased from 70.2 million last quarter to 14.3 million this quarter. There was only one recall that affected more than 1 million units. The total number of recalls and the number of units impacted was higher in first half 2025 compared to first half 2024. There were 252 recalls in the first half of 2024 and 270 in the first half of 2025. The number of units impacted more than doubled. It surged from 40.3 million in the first half of 2024 to 84.1 million in first half of 2025. In Q2 2025, undeclared allergens remain the leading cause of FDA food recalls with 62 events. Of this figure, milk was the most common allergen, cited in a total of 18 recalls. Bacterial contamination was the second highest cause of FDA food recalls in Q2 with 32 events. This is up from 29 in Q1. Foreign materials was third with 21 recalls. Bacterial contamination impacted 10.2 million units, the most of any hazard in Q2. Undeclared allergens were second by volume. There were 1.9 million units recalled for this concern. Foreign materials were third and impacted 1.2 million units. Prepared foods experienced the most recalls of any FDA food product category in Q2 2025. There were 49 events. This is up from 39 last quarter. Produce was second with 16 events. And baked goods were third with 14 recalls. In terms of units impacted in Q2, produce led with 8.9 million. Most of these were part of a major recall of cucumbers due to salmonella. Prepared foods were second by volume with 991,000 559 units recalled. Supplements were third, with 955,478 units impacted. So, Matt, would you like to share the USDA food recall data with the audience?
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks. So in Q2 2025, the number of USDA food recalls rose by about 67% to 15 events. It's compared to 9 recalls in Q1, and it's the highest quarterly total since Q4 of 2023. The number of units impacted increased by about 145% and went from about 425,000 pounds last quarter to a little over 1 million pounds this quarter. Compared to the first half of 2024, the first half of 2025 was higher in both events and volume. There were 19 recalls that impacted about 500,000 pounds in the first half of 2024, while in the first half of 2025, there were 24 recalls that affected almost 1.5 million pounds. In Q2 of 2025, the top reasons for USDA recalls by event were no inspection and a combination of misbranding and undeclared allergens with 3 recalls each. No import reinspection, foreign materials, and bacterial contamination had 2 events each, and then ineligible to export, misbranding, and excessive substance levels were each cited in 1 recall. By unit count, the combination of misbranding and undeclared allergens was the leading cause of USDA food recalls. It impacted almost 570,000 pounds in Q2. Foreign materials were second by volume this quarter. It was tied to about 280,000 pounds of recalled product. And then misbranding was third with about 143,000 pounds affected. Pork had 6 recalls in Q2 2025, which was up from 2 recalls the previous quarter. Poultry had 4 events, beef had 3, and then fish and multiple meats each had 1 recall apiece. Pork was also responsible for the most units recalled by product category, with about 582,000 pounds affected in Q2. Beef was second with about 272,000 pounds impacted, and that was followed by poultry with about 172,000 pounds.
All right, thanks, Matt. So a lot of food recalls, that have been occurring. I'm just curious, with all these in the news and social media, do you think consumers are paying attention? Do you think they're taking action?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one, guys. So I think, having been obviously in the recall industry and for a long time, I think recall fatigue is real, but not generally universal. I think with the increasing frequency of recalls, especially in the food industry, it seems like every day there's a new food recall, if not 2 or 3. I think definitely some consumers are showing, recall fatigue, and this can lead to undermining the effectiveness of recalls, as we know. But however, I still think it doesn't mean that consumers are indifferent. Many are still deeply concerned about the safety and still want accountability. Despite the fatigue, consumers are increasingly demanding better recall systems, more transparency, and faster action. And we know a lot of organizations use loyalty programs and digital tools to stay informed, and they're actively participating to constantly and consistently be improving those recall communications. So I think there's definitely some fatigue there. People are paying attention, but maybe not as hard as they need to be, but they're definitely still concerned and still looking into it if they have to.
Got it. All right, thanks, Joe. So before we take questions for this industry, we do want to share some additional insights from more of our partners. So this is the McGuire Woods team: Allison, Ashley, Max, and Royce. And just a quote from their article, you can read the full article within our published index. But food recalls are no longer just regulatory events. They have become litigation triggers, reputational tests, and systematic operational challenges. This evolution is colliding with shrinking federal oversight. The FDA experienced funding reductions and a 20% workforce reduction in the first half of 2025, limiting its capacity to conduct timely inspections and enforce rapid recall actions. As regulatory oversight capacity contracts, companies should assume more responsibility for early detection, product traceability, and consumer protection measures. Companies can no longer rely solely on the government agencies to safeguard public health. Instead, they must prepare for an era of self-regulation by investing in robust internal systems to manage recalls independently. So great information here from the McGuire Woods team. You can read more within the published article. So now we'll get to some of the questions. And right before I read that quote, I was looking at a question just related to with the reduction in the budget and resources within the FDA, do we think recalls will continue to increase or possibly decrease? And I think the McGuire Woods quote there did provide some good insight into that. So there could be these budget cuts that could reduce what may have generated recalls out of inspections and things. I think, as they mentioned, companies are going to have to be diligent to protect their brands because ultimately they're trying to uphold their promise of safe foods, quality foods. So they're going to have to take some responsibility. I do think testing has gotten better, traceability has gotten better. I don't think it's a case of the recalls are going up because food safety has gone down. I think there's just better identification and testing and traceability. There is this focus, I think, amongst food with the FDA compared to some of the other industries, just due to the infant formula recall a few years back. So I do think that focus will be high, but I think it'll be a shared responsibility within the industry and the FDA. So I don't really expect recalls to go down from that standpoint. All right, let's see if there's any insight on whether FDA's level of scrutiny for dietary supplement manufacturers' compliance with GMP regs have increased or lessened? That's a good question. Dietary supplements come up quite a bit. I've not heard increased or lessened necessarily. Matt, have you heard anything on your end? We can dig into that a little bit more. It's not something that's popped up either way on my radar.
Yeah, I haven't heard one way or the other, so I think we can take that one offline and dig into that a little bit more.
Yep. There's a comment, spent 32 years with the FDA. The budget cuts will not increase the recalls. Rather, it's FSMA and the fear of not doing their due diligence. What are your thoughts? I mean, that's an interesting comment. That could impact. That's tough to say. I mean, for me, it's to be seen. And a lot of this too is somewhat, some of this is speculation as well. So it's hard to see how it's going to play out, where the roles and responsibilities will come, where more money and focus will be on, especially with food. Again, as I mentioned before, I think there's been a spotlight on that. Some of the other industries, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I think it'll come down to also the consumer might end up making the final decision, right? So trust and loyalty, it's tough to regain that once it's lost. So I think companies are going to do their due diligence.
Yeah. There's a comment about, can we trust companies to really be diligent themselves in here with a couple examples as well. And I think they better be, because again, it's the amount of litigation tied to product safety and recalls is only increasing. And there's a lot of risk associated with that. So I think companies are going to have to. Now, are all companies going to always do the right thing? No, unfortunately. Are they going to want to spend that money up front to do the right thing? Probably not always. But it is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of risk outside of just the regulatory aspect with protecting brands and the liability that companies really need to focus on. All right, we've got a few other questions, but we're going to keep going in the interest of time. We'll try to hit those towards the very end as well. So with that, we're going to move on to the medical device industry. So let's test your knowledge with the question from that industry. So in June, FDA Commissioner Dr. McCary and the director of the FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, Dr. Prasad, published an article in JAMA discussing the 5 key priorities for the new FDA. What is not among the top 5 issues? A, accelerating cures. B, unleashing AI. C, securing the supply chain. Or D, harnessing big data. So please go ahead and make your selection. While people are answering that one, curious, Joe or Matt, what are your thoughts on AI usage within medical devices?
I can jump in and take that one, Chris. Yeah, this is really, I think there are several important concerns surrounding the integration of AI technology in medical devices. Despite, its transformative potential that everyone seems to be talking about every day in the news is AI. But I think some of these concerns definitely span across different areas like technical, regulatory, ethical, clinical. Personally, I think from a liability perspective, the ethical and legal implications will remain a big concern for regulators and healthcare providers. So, for example, what if an AI-enabled device caused harm? Who's responsible for that from a liability perspective? Is it the manufacturer, the clinician, the AI developer, or is it all the above? So I think there's a lot of questions that have to be, worked out and answered still. But I think AI is here to stay, guys.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going away. So these are going to have to be figured out.
I think so. I think you're right, Joe. All right, Joe, let's dive in. If you can give us some insights on the med device trends we're seeing.
Yep, will do. Thanks, Chris. Be happy to. So, like many other government agencies, HHS and the FDA have been moving quickly under the new administration to make comprehensive changes. In May, the regulators opened a 60-day public comment period to explore which current rules could be eliminated to reduce the burden on companies. In our opening question for this section, we mentioned Commissioner McCary's 5 key priorities to create a new FDA. The goal is to have a more proactive system that allows new products to get to market quickly while maintaining product safety standards. The FDA has adopted a new AI tool to help reinvent how the agency works. The technology is being integrated across the FDA to reduce the time needed for scientific evaluations, speed up clinical protocol reviews, and decide which facilities should be made high priority for inspections. Legal experts caution that there are risks for incorporating unproven technology into certain functions without careful considerations and oversight. Matt, do you want to give the answer to our question and share the medical device data?
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks. So the question was, from among the issues of accelerating cures, unleashing AI, securing the supply chain, and harnessing big data, which was not one of the top 5 priorities for the new FDA? This one was a difficult one for the audience. The group listening was very split, almost evenly. The answer, though, was C, securing the supply chain. The other 2 key concerns, really, for healthier food for children and reducing financial toxicity. So now let's take a closer look at the data. So in Q2 2025, the number of FDA medical device recalls increased by about 6% compared to Q1. It rose from 236 events to 251. There were 32 million units recalled this quarter, which was an increase of about 73% compared to last quarter. Looking at the first half comparisons, 2025 does lag behind 2024 in both recalls and units impacted. There were 487 events in the first half of 2025 compared to 538 in the first half of 2024. In terms of units recalled, there were about 250 million units recalled the first half of 2024 compared to only 51 million in the first half of 2025, so a huge decrease there. Software concerns were the leading cause of medical device recalls in Q2. There were 44 events. Device failure was the second most common concern with 32, and it was followed by false results with 29 recalls. Leakage risks were responsible for the most units recalled this quarter, with about 10.73 million units. The second most common reason for medical device recalls by volume was software concerns, where there were about 6 million units impacted. False results had the third highest number of units recalled, affecting about 5.5 million units. The number and volume of recalls across all classes rose in Q2. There were 36 Class 1 recalls that impacted about 4.3 million units, and that was the highest quarterly total for Class 1 events in the past 20 years. There were also 212 Class 2 recalls that involved about 28 million units, with finally 3 Class 3 recalls that affected about 2,900 units.
All right, thanks, Matt, for running through that data. I do have a question for you. What are your thoughts on mock recalls within the device industry, maybe compared to other industries?
Good question. So I think that mock recalls within device is becoming more and more a topic of conversation with medical device manufacturers that I talk to. When it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical companies are typically conducting a mock recall every year if they aren't having an actual recall. You see it a little less commonly within the medical device side, but again, I think it's becoming a little bit more of a topic of conversation and something that manufacturers are looking at. I don't know if that's to do with some of the regulations that are coming about, the push for AI, the different or new technologies that we're seeing, But I do think that it's becoming more and more of a concern for medical device companies. And I think that's great news. We tell all manufacturers that we talk with that mock recall is an important step, to be able to go through your recall process without your hair being on fire from an actual recall, without the stress and everything. It's a very important task. So I'm happy to see and happy to hear that medical device manufacturers are starting to look into it. And I hope that trend does continue here.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. All right, so before we take questions, again, insights from one of our partners on the medical device sector. So we're going to hear from Anura from UL Solutions, a quote from the article. Fundamentally, AI is nothing more than software, but this latest incarnation of software has some very unusual attributes that we are just starting to recognize and understand. It is essential that medical device manufacturers keep abreast of regulatory changes and new obligations for AI use. Due to the risk to patient health if issues arise, the FDA and the public will be watching. Without regulatory post-market surveillance tools that help us expose the vulnerabilities in these new AI applications, we risk patient harm and degradation of our health care infrastructure. So you can read more within our published article. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions within this industry. I know at the very beginning there was a question to the FDA's early communication pilot for medical devices. So with that, we know that I think that went in place in the fall. Yep, November. I think it's too early to tell, is it effective? I think they are starting to use it, especially on more high-risk type devices. But I think it's too early. I think some infusion pumps we saw have hit the news with some of that. So we're keeping a very close eye on it. It may be a good topic for us to report on the next index if we can get some better data associated with that. But good question from that standpoint. I did see a question before. This webinar is being recorded, so if you had to leave early, you'll be able to have access to the full recording of that you can review again or share as you see fit as well. I did see another question, and this was maybe more on the food side, but related to are recalls primarily voluntary or mandatory? And honestly, across the board, across the different industries, they're largely voluntary. Now, some may contend it's voluntold, but it's very rare that a government agency will utilize any type of mandatory recall power. It does happen, it has happened, but it's rare. Most of the
All right, looks like Chris may be having some technical difficulties. So Joe and I will move forward here. I think there are some other questions here within the chat, so we'll try to circle up with you. But in the interest of time, we'll move on to the final sector, which is pharmaceutical. So I'll kick things off here, Joe. So with the latest industry here for pharmaceuticals, here's your question. So in June, the FDA announced the Commissioner's National Priority Voucher Pilot Program designed to review new product applications significantly faster. What is the time frame that the agency is hoping to complete assessments under the new test program? Is the answer A, 1 to 2 months, B, 7 to 8 months, or C, 10 to 12 months? Please make your selection. And Joe, while the audience is looking at that, you came from within industry. You've already spoken a little bit about your background doing recalls, within the manufacturing part. You're joining back here with the Sedgwick team after being gone for a few years. What are your thoughts here on coming back? We're happy to have you, but have you seen a lot of changes during your time away?
Oh, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's really great to be back and reconnect with friends and colleagues at Sedgwick. It's really exciting for me to come back. And I think, Matt, it's really great to have left and gone into industry. I'm really excited to share my knowledge with our clients on the importance, of recall readiness and talking about mock recalls and testing your plan. Like we always say, it's not if, but when a recall will occur. And an area that I'm really focused on with our clients is trying to do risk sensing. We want to try to detect those safety issues early and try to minimize the impact of a recall and do some risk mitigation. So I'm really excited to bring some of that knowledge and experience to our clients, and looking forward to just being back in it and handling recalls for clients. And it's every day is a different day, so it's very exciting and happy to be back, Matt.
We are happy to have you back. I think we also need to trademark that line of it's not a matter of if, but when a recall happens. So great to have you back. I'll move into the pharmaceutical side here. So, there has been a lot of attention given to the FDA's efforts to remove color additives in the food sector. However, pharmaceutical companies will also be impacted by that. So in April, the agency issued a draft guidance on replacing color additives in approved or marketed drug products. The Trump administration also wants to make drugs more affordable for American consumers. In May, the president actually issued an executive order that was requiring pharmaceutical manufacturers to offer most favored nation pricing for products sold in the U.S. Specific targets have already been set for pharmaceutical manufacturers, and they have several months to report how they will meet their obligations. One factor that will impact pricing is possible tariffs. The Department of Commerce initiated an investigation into the national security impacts of imported pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical ingredients, and derivative products. Tariffs may be set for certain finished drugs and components just based on those findings. So now let's see how everyone did here and jump into the pharmaceutical question and get the answer. So again, the question was, what is the time frame in which the FDA hopes to review new product applications under the commissioner's new National Priority Voucher Program? Just looking at the audience, looks like the audience was incorrect on this. Looks like the majority thought that it was going to be B. The actual correct answer, though, is A, 1 to 2 months compared to the current average review time of 10 to 12 months for certain types of drugs. So now let's dig into the data a little bit closer. Joe, do you want to take it from here?
Yep. Thanks, Matt. I'll go through this pretty quickly, guys. So there were 97 FDA pharmaceutical recalls in Q2 2025. This is an increase of just over 11% compared to Q1. In contrast, the total number of units fell by 32.4%. There were 27.7 million units recalled last quarter and 18.7 million this quarter. First half had fewer recalls compared to the same period in 2024. There were 205 pharmaceutical recalls in the first half of 2024 versus 184 events in the first half of 2025. In contrast, the number of units recalled rose significantly from 13.8 million in the first half of 2024 to 46.5 million in the first half of 2025. The leading cause of pharmaceutical recalls in Q2 2025 was GMP deviations with 29 events. That is up from 12 last quarter. There were 24 events that involved sterility concerns, making it the second most common cause. Failed specifications were third. They were linked to 9 recalls. Sterility impacted the most units by volume with 6.9 million. GMP deviations were second by volume. They affected 5 million units. Contamination impacted 3 million units. It was the third highest total of any pharmaceutical risk this quarter. The number of Class 1 and Class 3 pharmaceutical recalls and units impacted fell quarter over quarter from Q1 2025 to Q2. This quarter had 6 Class 1 recalls and 4 Class 3 recalls. The number of Class 2 recalls increased from 64 to 87. However, the number of Class 2 units involved dropped from 26.7 million in Q1 to just over 18 million in Q2.
All right, thank you, Joe. I'm back. If you noticed, I was dropped. Just part of the typical happenings of doing these webinars. But we all work in crisis management, so I'm back in a different room, it looks like now. But so we're going to jump right into our industry insights from our next partner. Matt, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. So this is Rachel Turo. She's with Skadden. And Rachel said, while a lot has changed at the FDA under the new administration, inspections, warning letters, and recalls continue to reveal the same types of issues that have been seen historically. Products are still being cited and recalled for failure to comply with GMPs, nitrosamine contamination, labeling issues, the presence of foreign objects, or other adulterants, and sterility failures. There are 3 areas of particular interest that warrant further attention and consideration related to FDA strategy. That is unannounced foreign inspections and import alerts on Chinese products, the end of the GLP-1 shortage and enforcement against compounders, and the recalls of OTC drugs due to benzene contamination. So you can read more about that in our index, but now we will move into any questions with pharmaceutical industry. I know we are up against the clock here.
Yeah, I don't see any specific pharma questions. So with that, since due to timing, we'll just move into wrapping things up. So in today's session, we gave you a high-level view of the top recall data in Q2. However, there are more details in the full Q2 product safety and recall index report that you'll get. You'll also find more in-depth insights from the partners that you got a preview of today, information on regulatory trends we discussed in the presentation, but also a preview of the July 2025 recall numbers.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to today's presentation, we will email you the full digital version of the U.S. Product Safety and Recall Index using the email that you used to register for this session.
And also as a reminder, the webinar for the European edition of the Recall Index is Thursday, August 29th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. If you want to learn what is happening with recalls and regulations from the perspective of EU and UK stakeholders, please join our colleagues next week. Also, please register for our Australian webinar and index report coming on September 18th. If you need information for any of these other events, please send us an email or make a note in the chat and we'll get you all the details. I think we may, nope, I don't think we have time, guys. We are up against the clock right here. So again, thank you so much for your time today, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again in the next quarter. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Bye, guys. Take care, everyone.